Hello everyone, I'm your host Amartya Singh, co-founder and CEO of Inflow, a product built by and for modern finance teams. So we are back with the second episode of our podcast series Inside the CFO Office, an exclusive channel for finance professionals to know more about the journeys of finance leaders and trailblazers in the CFO office and the biggest challenges they have faced and solved and they take on the future of finance. In today's episode of the podcast series, where we are looking to work on the topic of navigating the finance, sales, and strategy conundrum, we are super excited to have Dustin Walsted as our guest to share his journey with us. Dustin has 15 plus years of checkered experience across diverse industries like education, bank, railroad, real estate, and marketing services. Dustin currently serves as a VP of Finance Technology, Strategy, and HR at Smart City Apartment Locating and Smart City Digital. He has an MBA from Naveen Jindal School of Management, UT Dallas, and Bachelor of Science degree from Texas Christian University. What I love the most about Dustin is his intent and capability to understand the importance and applicability of technology and strategy in finance and multiple other business problems that he works on. So, welcome, Dustin. Great to have you over
Yeah,
here in
thanks
the
for inviting me. I
podcast.
appreciate it.
Thanks, Dustin. So, I think let's kickstart the podcast. So, to our first question, and if you look at your journey, it's been really amazing, right? You have worked across sectors from education to railroad to steel industry, and more importantly, you've also worked across so many roles, across like education and student affairs to finance leader at your current organization. While it must have been really exciting to work across, it must have come with a lot of challenges as well, right? I can speak from my personal experience, having worked across sectors. It takes a particular zeal and to and intent to take on different challenges, and you have done that. So tell us more about how your journey has been across these roles up to right now, where you are
Sure.
as a finance leader.
Ironically, I never knew I would be a finance leader. In fact, I've joked before that I failed undergrad accounting and now I lead finance. And you wouldn't have thought that. So, looking back, I can actually attribute a lot of the different roles, and I can see that I learned different things that have helped me to become the leader I am today from different facets of my background. So, after I graduated high school, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So I got involved when I went to an associate's degree, community college. I joined the honor society there, and I can attribute a lot of my leadership to that environment. So Phi Theta Kappa is like the largest international honor society of 2-year colleges, and so I was a chapter president, chapter officer. There was regional events, there was national office, and so that gave me a lot of exposure to truly carving out a path of like, hey, you want to accomplish something, here's how you can get people on board on and doing that. So whether it was we did a street cleanup, we did a project with a local high school, to I was the campaign manager for one of my best friends' successful international president campaign for student office in Phi Theta Kappa. So I learned a lot about leadership in that environment. Again, working on campus with students. If you ever want to know how to learn how to do dispute resolution, get two college students to talk to you about their problems. It's a lot of the
Right.
things that I learned there I applied to doing cross department mediation between leaders, teaching high school students over the summer. Again, if you want to try to explain a concept and break it down, nothing will humble you faster than teaching it to high school students, because they will ask you questions and challenge, well, why does that work that way? And so a lot of that has been super impactful into how I lead. When it comes to getting into finance, I had a very basic understanding of the principles, but when I was at the railroad, I was in a very cross departmental operational role. We were working on a safety system, and so I had to work with different groups. And I was getting my MBA at the time, and I saw there was a posting for a position in finance that was aligned with my project management background. And so I, reached out to people and started talking to them that work currently in the role, and they kind of explained, hey, there's the base of what we do. So within 3 weeks, I started, doing all the research I could. I interviewed for it. The first interview was a case study. They put you in a room with the air gapped computer, and they said, here's an Excel spreadsheet, here's a questionnaire, make us a model. And then the second part of the interview was a bunch of questions about the scenarios that they had you model out. I bombed that model. I look back now going, yeah, that was terrible. But I found out from later on that the questions I asked about the project were some of the best they've ever heard. And they said, listen, we can teach you the core hard skills of finance, but we can't teach the experience that you would bring having worked with so many different facets. And so that's kind of been the theme of me in my finance career, is that, from there, I worked in the CFO's office directly for a $20 billion enterprise. I got deep into FP&A and the strategic finance there. And then, I had truly, it was the deep end of learning. I went from doing one very operational focused thing to having millions and billions of dollars worth of projects that I had to evaluate with the CFO. And so it was great. I loved it. And then, through happenstance, I met this company that I ended up using. And then I started talking to the CEO, and I was going to just consult on the side. And after about 2 weeks, she said, hey, listen, I don't have anybody on my team that asks questions that you ask, that thinks of numbers and finance and operations and how they all kind of play together. So she's like, I'd love to make you an offer to come join our executive team. And so I did that. And then it's been just me growing with the business as it has grown. I think we're at 4x the growth that we were at when I started. And so it's been an amazing journey, but one that, again, it's interesting how I got there, but I can appreciate all the different experience I've had along the way.
Got it. Great to see your journey. And you were candid enough to talk about the initial phases when you really bombed.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And what I believe is it's very important to fail, because when you fail, you actually realize that, life, when, you need to do a lot of more learnings, you need to see it as a challenge, have a lot of takeaways from it and to work on the best role, work on the next role. So that's something that you did really well. And especially also the point you mentioned about railroad, where you worked across different roles and different functions. I think that was your first experience. It was working across functions and, understanding what goes behind the curtains of a strategy function or a tech function or a sales function. There are so many different functions. Everybody's working to make a company really successful. And from your perspective, it really must have been, great learning for you to understand these roles. And then your also one more interesting point you mentioned about the importance of mixing theory plus application. You knew the theory can be taught to you, but the actual application is where you learned really of applying those kind of finance, whatever you have learned, right? So that was one great thing. And right, and the other experience with regards to your working in the $20 billion role, working across multiple million dollars of projects, those must have been lots of responsibilities, working across these, right? I can really understand the kind of learnings that you must have had. So I think want to move to the next question, leading up from where we had actually left. One of the important things that, Tarun, you and I have had multiple in-depth discussions on, the problems and challenges in the finance ecosystem, right? And what stands out to me is your ability to see beyond just finance, right? And your willingness to explore solutions that draw from other domains like HR or tech or business marketing, right? And it's very refreshing for me to discuss, these finance problems with such a broad perspective, right? And would love to know, obviously there is a 15 years of experience which goes behind this viewpoint of yours, but would love to know what are the 2 3 primary reasons that drove you to venture beyond the limits of finance and delve into areas like sales strategy, technology, and multiple other functions. Would love to know
Sure.
what drove you there.
I guess one of the two, there's two big reasons, right? One, it's the business reason. And so when you join a smaller and work in a more of a startup or a very lean organization, you kind of have to learn everybody and what they're doing and how the different functions work. I've talked recently about what it looks like to hire for finance roles. And truly, it's, you start with a generalist. You have to have somebody who has a broad understanding about a lot of things, because as the business priorities change rapidly, you don't have time to cascade a new directive down 3, 4, 5 layers. And so, I was able to really sit in a role that was able to, the business kind of dictated that need, right? You can't be a specialist in a very lean organization. So, for even in fact, this last few weeks, I've been working with my customer experience team, and we've been talking pretty heavily on just like, hey, what's their workflow? And I modeled it out. And I said, hey, guess what? I'm looking at your pipelines. I'm looking at all the metrics we use and our scorecards. And, if we can actually get 5% better here, do y'all know what that's worth to the business? Cool. Now let's go have a conversation on the execution. So the business kind of dictates what it looks like for who sits in that seat and the skills that they have to have. Personally, I get bored fast. And so I'm not an accountant for a reason. There's very much people who are methodical and consistent. That's not me. And so, that speaks to a broader conversation about how we're really good, I'd say, about building a team and leveraging strengths and weaknesses. So I know my strengths are I am super inquisitive. When I dive into something, I will dive in deep. But I am not going to be the
Right.
person who is the most consistent about follow up or the most consistent about X, Y, and Z. So, one, I love technology that automates a lot of stuff for me. But I mean, our entire executive team, we've built around the principle that, there's three of us at the top, and we are extremely complementary in our skill sets with what we're good at and what we need to work on. And so, knowing yourself and knowing how you contribute to a team is huge. And I'm actually going to get on a soapbox for a second. I keep saying team because that's what a good workplace has, a team, not a family. Because a family is a group of people who you're kind of bonded to for a non-choice. Whereas, we look at ourselves and we're like, hey, we're a team because my goal is to be the best and make you the best because you winning and me winning is the same thing. Right. And so, when we build a team around us, we say, hey, this is what I'm really good at, but this is what I need help with. And so my direct reports, my department heads, they are strong individuals. We are a strong team because we all have complementary skills. So the business dictated it, but it also works well that I'm a kind of person who, listen, I'm nosy. Like, what are you doing? How can I make us better? Right. I'm looking to see what I can do to add value to your department and see, how can I make you a little more improved here. So both reasons work really well.
Got it. Great to know how you have gone about your work. I agree with that point of being a generalist vis-a-vis specialist. Specialists have their own place and value that they add to an organization. Being a generalist really helps leadership. As such, you need to be a generalist, right? Because from the view of a top layer, you need to have perspective of what is going on in your business side, tech side, so you can connect all the dots and actually grow on to become a leader, right? So from that perspective, I completely agree with you that you need to have a good bird's eye perspective of all the different domains. And that was a very interesting point. I mean, very good to know that you're working with the CX team. I mean, that's great because see, ultimately the CX team and interacting with your customers, and you anyway, you look at receivables, you look at the different touch points of clearing out the receivables. You have a strong need to work with your customers, and CX team gives you that input. They give you an input to how to increase revenues, how to cross sell, upsell. There's so many different insights that you can great to know that you're working with the CX team. And the other aspect that you mentioned was, on the tech automation, your love for automation, and I've seen that. And I have a follow-up question on that later. But always loved your approach towards how technology can be used. And the other aspect that you mentioned about teams, right? That was a very interesting aspect because what I believe is that, and that also is linked with the specialist and generalist kind of requirement in an organization, right? From a leader's perspective, and you mentioned that skill sets should be complementary, and that's how you bind together and work as a team for betterment of the organization rather than each individual unit. And that was a very interesting point from the skill sets perspective. One minor question on the skill sets perspective, for example, from a team perspective, you're working with there are sales and marketing and other functions, and then there are other functions within finance, receivables, payables, and FP&A. Different kind of roles are there, right? So from that perspective, is there a lot of changes between working with finance teams? I know different inter-departments of finance teams vis-a-vis sales. I know, are there a lot of changes between these two?
Say yes and no. So at the end of the day, a metric is a number. And a lot of finance people are strong with numbers. The question always becomes is what outside
Right.
influences dictate and influence and change that number, right? So, if it's sales, right? At the end of the day, a one contract is a one and a lost contract is a zero. So what can we do to increase the
Right.
ones and minimize the zeros? And so, and then it's the same thing with payables, right? How 100% cleared out account is phenomenal. And so when it comes to, I think the common theme is always that there is a number that everyone kind of is held accountable. That's business, right? The question just kind of, you have to tailor your how to achieve the what, right? The what is the number. The how is where you talk to different teams and say, hey, how do you achieve what you're looking for, and how do
Right.
you achieve what you're looking for, and then kind of just being curious from going from there.
That's a brilliant answer. I think metric is the single biggest common denominator across teams. Work out what you are targeting, and then you work with the teams how you want to do it. It's a great answer. Thanks for sharing the answer. And moving to the next question, right? I wanted to understand a little bit more about across the last 15 years of experience. You must have faced a lot of challenges, right? I'm sure you've worked across teams, you've worked across roles, you've worked across organizations. Each role requires a different set of mindset, different set of approach. What are the two biggest challenges that you've faced in your career, and how did you work towards resolving it?
So I would say the first one is actually one that hasn't ever stopped. It's imposter syndrome. And so one of the weird things is, with every opportunity, I've almost always had the like wake up at 1 o'clock in the morning freaking out. Am I ready for this? Right. And I don't know if that's a generational thing, if it's because I'm like an older millennial or what it is, but I have found that there have been multiple times where, I'll sit there and I'll doubt myself and I'll just sit there going, saying, "Hey, is this? Am I ready for this challenge?" Again, and I said earlier, right? I failed accounting. I retook it. I got a B, and then I took it for my MBA, and I got it. I passed with an A, and so like that was, I think, one of the first times I was able to prove to myself that like, hey, yeah, you failed over here, but you then retook it in a harder, and excelled. And so, that was actually kind of a catalyst in a lot of ways for me, was to kind of I fall back on that, right? Where it's like, hey, you weren't ready for something, but you then worked towards it and you kept working on it. And so, I've heard this quote constantly that's like, hey, if you weren't ready for it, then you wouldn't even have the opportunity to kind of quell the imposter syndrome. So that's an ongoing challenge. I mean, the fact that I'm doing a podcast on finance leadership is wild to me. And I love it, right? And so like that's a huge one. And it's an ongoing battle where you also have to realize, listen, we're all doing our best. We're all trying to figure this out together, and the important thing is that you don't stop. You have to keep trying. Also admitting that, hey, you are a person who's going to take the experience you have and apply it to the best of your ability. The second one's a little more practical. We had a great period of growth in our company's history recently, and then we had a massive economic shift, and we saw our entire margins and our entire pacing and projecting pretty much bottom out overnight. And so I mean, to the point where we were losing 6 to 7 figures a month. And so, we as a leadership team kind of saw the writing on the walls, and we had to do a reduction in force. And we cut pretty deep, right? We did almost probably a 35% total reduction. One of the hardest things to lead through. First, what do we do to kind of navigate that? We took it seriously. And I say that from a place where, having sat in that seat, I am extremely critical of the organizations that take a very laissez-faire approach to doing a reduction in force and layoffs. We knew that we were making a massive impact on people's livelihoods, and we took it very seriously. So we also did we did budget. We knew this was coming. Nobody will ever tell you like it was a surprise layoff. Everyone knows what's happening, right? Especially finance leaders, because we have to know that thing. We have to kind of have some predictability with where we think the business is going. So as we saw that the writing was on the wall that we were going to have to do this, we made sure that we budgeted a way to take care of everybody financially, because we knew we were impacting their earning potential. So, we took a very real person approach, which is one of our core values, but we actually live by it, where we said, hey, we know that this person's about to suddenly be without a job. We need to give them a runway to help them and find the next opportunity and support them however best we can. So we took that seriously. For the people who stayed, we also didn't just say, all right, this same work has to get done. There's half of you here now, get the job done. We went to a very much mission critical workload only, to where we said, hey, if this is what has to happen, that's all we do until we kind of figure out what the next steps are. So, we knew it was coming. We took care of our people. And then for everyone who stayed, we were very honest. Like, this is what's happening. This is the environment we're in. We also didn't sugarcoat it in company announcements. We were as transparent as we could be with like, hey, this is how we performed last month and we're nervous. So we did get a lot of feedback that like nobody was surprised. They just kind of didn't know how it was going. And honestly, we all hoped it would turn around, but it didn't. So we did have to do that. It was awful. And thankfully, we did course correct a lot of things. The economics turned around, and so we actually even brought some people back on who were in some pretty important roles. What we took from a learning of that is that there was multiple business units that were extremely economic dependent, and that's huge on a risk thing for me. And so the leaders and I kind of said, hey, we have to de-risk ourselves, because I never want to be in a position where one or two changes can make that big of an impact. So we went to a diversification of revenue approach. That's actually why we launched the agency underneath our brand, is that we said, hey, we can take a skill that we have and we can make a new channel that's a little more resilient than our current core business. And so a lot of our ventures came from the learnings of, hey, we just had too many eggs in this basket and a couple of them cracked. And so it was unfortunate, but I mean, everyone who I've talked to have said, hey, it sucks, but you have to kind of be a real human being when it comes to making a hard business decision. Because at the end of the day, we're a leader in charge of running the business and making sure the business is as healthy as possible. But I would also challenge any leader that if they're not taking care of their workforce, they're not actually taking care of their business.
Right, got it. The second answer was really nice and really insightful because I mean, as you rightly said, taking these decisions are hard, and I really appreciate the courage that you had to understand that this has an impact and this needs to be taken done seriously. Like if there is a casual approach, it creates confusion in the minds of the people who are working, right? And then taking a better and being more pragmatic and being more open with everybody involved makes a lot of sense because people then know what to expect. They're not in the dark. Okay, anything can happen at any point of time, and so that they can plan it out. And really, more I really appreciate also how you planned out. What is going to happen with people who are going to stay and people who are not going to stay. So that was a difficult decision, and I'm sure it must have been a difficult decision to take at your end. And the other aspect of mission critical projects, right? And that's also something that we also have work at, right? So there are mission critical projects which gives you certain level of, as you mentioned, the metrics. Those are the most important projects. The other projects are more strategic or more which is going to give you the benefits in the future, as something that have to pay a second fiddle to the mission critical projects, and the focus really helps. Great to know you have gone about that entire process. It must have been a great learning because this is not about technology or processes or business problems,
Yeah.
right? This is human problems, and it requires a different kind of courage and different mindset to understand, and most importantly empathy to understand it, right? So really great. And to know to know your approach to the two challenges. The first one, imposter syndrome, all of us face it. I also face it. Whether we are ready for it, each and every challenge is a new problem, especially since you have worked across different sectors and different roles. You must be battling it on every day-to-day basis, right? This is a new problem. And really great answer. And yeah, let me move to the next question. So this is one of my favorite questions in all podcasts. It's about technology. I am a big believer in technology, and I know you also love the technology. And from my personal experience, when we had started to build the product for FinFlow, I loved it when a finance person understood and appreciated technology, right? And when Tarun, you and I had brainstormed on a product and we had showcased a product to you, your feedback and insight were just awesome, and really nice to know the clarity of your thoughts and how we can improve the product, how the product is going to solve the problem statement. So you are someone who understands technology and is ready to use it and apply it to solve their problems, be it problems of cash flows or operational efficiency or errors or eliminating any manual kind of flows. You are ready to use that, right? So we'd love to know your thoughts on how you see the overall finance technology landscape has evolved over the last 1 2 decades.
Yeah, I would say it is funny how technology and finance have somehow always been linked through the data, and in the most recent history, I think that people have really put emphasis on the connectivity between those two and leverage them together. So, when I was at the railroad, I was pulling data from a massive data warehouse, and it was something where I just got used to churning through database tables and understanding queries, and so I know that not every business or even finance person is used to that outside of maybe some very niche and roles, and so it is. I appreciate how the two have had a lot of very similarities. For example, both groups care about a source of truth, right? We want to know the financial source of truth and the data source of truth. And so I appreciate how they're being married together. I think the biggest evolution that I've realized and kind of seen is just how we're optimizing the rote mundane tasks to create value add efficiencies. What I mean by that is a lot of people have in the finance function, a lot of entry level positions are just do this job, right? It is do this data input. For a long time, that was what finance was. It was inputs and outputs, right? And so it was very manual inputs. there was a person who did some analysis or some kind of thought process or some energy behind, making sense of it, and then they create an output. I think what technology has really done is improve the speed at which we can capture inputs, at which we can look for pattern recognition or inconsistencies or consistencies. We can set parameters where what used to be manual is now saying, hey, this is what we're looking to accomplish. Can we do that? And then what I'm loving is this theme around how are we elevating the finance functions from just data management to decision and evaluative conversations with what does this mean? When I was taking statistics the first time in my community college, I remember this professor I had, and he said, listen, there's two thoughts around statistics. I can teach you how to by hand create all these different values and all these calculations and create and do all this work, or I can teach you how to use a calculator and to instead say, what does this number mean? What is its significance? And I think that's how the whole finance workflow is kind of evolving. It's, listen, for many, many years, people just knew how to do statistics by hand. And a lot of people's sole responsibility was just doing the statistics by hand. And now we've all said, hey, technology, this beautiful TI-83 Plus calculator, is now going to say, this is what just give me the inputs, and now let's make meaning from what this is. And so I think that trend is just going to continue, but I think we've come a long way. And again, with just, hey, this is a very simple problem statement. It has a lot of very low hanging fruit when it comes to just efficiency. Let's just put some data behind it. We now have tools and logics and algorithms, and we can do all these things to elevate the finance function, and it's phenomenal.
Got it. Great answer. And love the way you went beyond what historically has been. So there is obviously there's a lot of data in an ERP or data that you are actually constantly creating and churning out. What is most important is how can you use the data to take decisions, right? So there is something known as primarily taking decisions based on gut calls or based on your experience, primarily kind of muscle memory for taking these decisions, right? Vis-a-vis a data-driven decision is much more automated, much more cleaner, much more scalable, because then in that case, you have 10 customers, you have 500 customers, 5,000 or 50,000 customers. The data helps you take those decisions. It's no more muscle memory, it's no more gut calls and instinct, right? So data-driven decisions is actually a very interesting and a very key point as well, because the point that if finance leaders know that there is data and you can do a lot of the data, that changes around the use of technology, and technology can help you take decisions. You want
No,
to add
it's
something here?
funny. Our CEO is phenomenal. Well, she'll oftentimes, she'll make a call and be like, hey, I think we should do X, Y, and Z, and I'm like, and then she'll throw a number out, and the sales team has gotten really funny because they'll be like, that's a staggering number, and that's a number that she's like, I feel like it's a gut decision, right? And so there's been multiple times where we're like,
Right.
hold on, that might be your gut and you have a lot of experience for that, but let's go ahead and double check it with some numbers and double check that your gut's really on the right track. So I balance it a lot with her being like, I think it's probably like 70%. I'm like, I think we might need to double check some stuff real fast. Let me pull a spreadsheet, because it's true. Everyone has made gut decisions before, but you can know it also helps to affirm that your gut decision is either supported or challenged by the data. But ultimately, the number of data inputs to help make sure you're guided to making a good data-driven decision. Absolutely.
No, actually, one more interesting point of the discussion which you mentioned, right? Over the last 1 2 decades, also, boardroom discussions have changed a lot, right? So, for example, if you see till a little point of time, the CEO or the leadership team or the maybe let's call the CEO, for example, used to check on with the CFO, the finance leader on certain aspects like bookkeeping closed or not, the accounting in place or not. These were the primary decisions which used to be taken. But over a point of time, what has really changed is strategical decisions, right? What you mentioned, right? There are a lot of inputs which a finance leader needs to give, right? It's on the revenue side, it's on the cost side, it's on the cash flow side, it's touching all the functions across a company, right? So that I think is really changed in the boardroom, how the discussions are panned out to more strategic, more data driven, more representation to the investors, or more representation, the internal employees. There's a lot of discussions that have changed, and I'm sure you must have seen right from the start, and when you were at the railroad company, and then at smart city. I mean, there must have been a ton of changes. Have you also witnessed those changes in terms of the discussions which you're having with your
Yeah, I will say so. The old CFO I worked for, Julie Pickett, she was phenomenal. She really modeled out what a strategic finance leader should look like because she was one that, it was always show me the numbers. What do the numbers mean? And then she would ask you, like, all right, well, walk me through how you achieve this number. So it was very much, and again, talking to other leaders in the industry, and they said the same thing. There's been multiple even articles that have been said, like the rise of a strategic CFO and what that means. And it's like, hey, it's not just somebody we're not making decisions based on how a small group of people feel. It's we're now surveying a larger population saying this is what matters. This is what the data has proven to us. We'll absolutely question and call to it, and we'll question the integrity of like, hey, was there reporting bias in there? Was there different like I think we're having a better conversation when we start asking, are we sure the data was handled properly, chain of custody, all that jazz? All right, cool. Let's do what the data says, because at the end of the day, we're making a well-informed decision. So we didn't just ask 5 people in a room; we asked 5,000 people who have given us some kind of input somehow.
right, right, right. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I agree because data also, I mean, the point about taking decisions based on 5 people or 50 people or 500 people, that makes decisions much more unbiased and much more data driven. So that I think is a big trick in the arsenal of a great CFO and a finance leader, and I mean as well as a great organization. So I'll move to the next question. Correct. So I think we spoke about the finance technology landscape, right, and what has happened. Let's talk a little bit about how future is going to be the finance technology. In today's state, finance leaders are on par with business marketing and other leaders in terms of adopting the latest technologies, right? In fact, they are leading the race. That's the new stats that we have seen, right? And they're thinking beyond ERP and accounting softwares, right? I mean, they're thinking much beyond that, right? You have come across as somebody who leads by example as a finance leader in terms of accepting and embracing new technology. So, would love to understand what's your take on the future of finance technology. Do you see AI, artificial intelligence, also playing a big role? Your take on this
Yeah,
particular topic statement?
I was asked this question recently too. I think for a lot of people, AI is still a buzzword, right? It's very much you've got a lot of PE and VC firms who are like, oh, it's AI this and AI that, and it's like, okay. There's also people who understand what AI is. AI is just really complex machine learning, multiple layers of really good machine learning. And so I think, and it's funny because people are like AI is new. AI is not new. Technology is not new. It's just it's being. I think what we're seeing is a rapid speed in deployment in different things of the data sources that AI can look through and then give you feedback on. And so I think as what's going to happen over the next 5 years, I mean, one, we don't know, but I think we're going to see momentum around what we've already been seeing happen. So all the improvements with, hey, this is just good data in. I think the people who are able to leverage the AI tools and platforms and say, hey, this is the inputs. You're going to see a lot of people who are going to be really good at putting good parameters around the AI surveying, right? The AI, what we're looking to derive. So I think you're going to see the next iteration of analysis improvements because now you're going to look for a pattern recognition. I remember having to go through spreadsheets and do plot maps and go, okay, well, maybe this is of significance, maybe it's not, I don't know. But now I could possibly put this in an environment where I've got 10 more data sources and I could look for correlating information, say, okay, well, this to this to this change, but here's 5 other things I could consider that may be a reason for it. So I think the more that we're going to be able to aggregate data and make meaning from it, I think you're going to see that improvement happen over the next half decade because we're expanding our conversation. We're expanding what we're looking at, what we're evaluating. So I think, AI, not buzzword AI, but I think actual AI is going to help with just churning through and connecting more data sources to give you a more holistic picture and help make meaning from the data that you're looking at or the question you're trying to have.
Got it. I think the aggregation of the data is the trick over here. And I also agree that AI and is a buzzword right now. So we are using artificial, we had spoken about it. We are using machine learning to do credit risk scoring. We are using artificial intelligence, but we also don't, put it because, we put it and say, okay, there you go again. The AI/ML is again there. So although we have it, we don't actually portray it. I completely agree with you with regards, but we see phenomenally great, applications of AI/ML, and the future is there. One small question before we head to the final question. One small question on the ERP side, right? I mean, we talked about QuickBooks, we have talked about NetSuite, we have talked about Dynamics, SAP. One question that I had in my mind was, how do you see the overall ERP and accounting software, ecosystem panning out? Do you believe that they will be also including these kind of data-driven solutions and, models and all, or do you believe that they need to do it, and there's a scope for a much more improvement over there in these
I
accounting
think
softwares and
you're going to
ERPs?
see the companies and the tech stacks that focus on being more open ended, because maybe if they're not a full ERP and you don't have every single data endpoint in that environment, the companies that are going to be on the bleeding edge of making really good investment decisions, business decisions, personal decisions, anything, they're going to want to look at surveying all their data as efficiently as possible. So any tech stack that's going to play to that strength and not necessarily just be, tribal knowledge data hoarding, if it's going to be a pain to massage and extrapolate that data out, you're gonna get left behind, because all the groups are like, hey, we know that you need to see 5 different departments main KPIs and one, like, to give a good clear picture. Those will be the companies that give preferential treatment and that will start to just, see more adoption, or more market share. The ones that are locked, I mean, I just watched a company post that they're now charging API key access, and it's like, that's not going to be helpful when everyone wants to use data to make a decision. You're now putting a mark in the con category for your renewal when it comes up. It's like, hey, if I can get the exact same thing over here, but it's way less friction and I can leverage this to make a better business decision, that's going to be the tech that I can leverage. So I think any company that's not thinking about that, and whether it's, an ERP, whether you're bundling it, every department has their own, you're gonna have businesses demand this. So the companies that get ahead of that and are really adaptable to it are gonna be the ones that succeed.
Great. Thanks for the answer. Now we move to the last question, and it's a more personal question. You have went across different roles on to becoming a finance leader, right? And from my discussions with Tarun and you, I have also seen that level of wisdom and maturity in the way go about hearing out a problem statement and solving it. So would love to know. I mean, for our viewers, there are a lot of finance folks who are listening up to this. So what would be your 2 3 pieces of advice, which they can imbibe into the career to become a finance leader in the future and take be
Sure.
where you are right now?
Be curious, first of all. You really, it's one thing to think that hey, I know this probably works. It's a curiosity is an approach to everything, right? It's, hey, I wonder how this is doing. But even when you're giving feedback interpersonally, hey, maybe you notice somebody who's underperforming, versus just laying straight down, going to a pit process. Hey, John Doe, I've noticed your performance has been, off the last few weeks. Like, what's going on? Like, so curiosity is the framework in which you're gonna get an answer, but you disarm the person that you're asking for, because you're coming at it looking to possibly benefit or help. And so I would say curiosity as an approach to everything is a huge, huge positive to just start getting reps with and practicing. I would say the second thing would be comfortable with spreadsheets and the core finance principles, the tools of the trades, inputs, modification, output, incremental cost benefit, what if analysis. It is ironic how often I just build a spreadsheet for something really fast, because one, my brain works better that way, but two, it allows you to kind of pragmatically look at something and say, okay, let me organize, let me kind of break it down into its most like fundamental components. And then I've learned that just that's an approach that I've developed over time. But if you're able to kind of understand those core common principles around, hey, a what if scenario is most of what I do every day. It's like, hey, okay, we're here, we're at X. If we can get to Y, do you know what that does to the business? Great. How do we achieve the X to Y increase? I was talking to somebody about a sales incentive, and they're like, hey, we want to we want to spend this much more. And I was like, well, great. If we spend this much more incremental cost, what's the incremental benefit? Are we going to achieve X results because we're not motivating? We put a great, cool prize in front of people. That's awesome. So I've taught my sales leaders even to think about incremental cost and benefit, which is a huge win for me because they get it. Hey, we're okay overspending here because it means more over here. Get comfortable knowing those
Right.
principles, and even just I would start looking at your everyday occupation and trying to frame it in those principles. And then finally, I would say the last thing is just put yourself out there. The answer is no unless you ask. But if you open an approach with curiosity, hey, I would love if you could explain this to me, or I'd love to see if I could add value to, your input, your business, your department, your project, your initiative, whatever it is. If you kind of marry those two together, I think you're really going to give people the inspiration to give you an opportunity to try something new. One of my favorite success stories is, I had a team member who, she's like, hey, I want to do what you do. I'm like, well, no, you don't. I'm really stressed all the time. She's like, no, but like the data and the analysis and like the kind of like how they all play together. And I was like, great, let me let me show you a little bit what it looks like. And so we talked about it. And so I said, great. She's like, well, how can I do this more often? I said, if you want to do this, if you're curious about it, I will give you the opportunity. I will give you all these projects of things that my nice to haves, my want to gets done. And so we did. And so I think probably 7 months later, she had updated her, we gave her a new job title. We kind of increased her responsibilities. Within 7 months, she was poached by a massive firm. And she came in office and she was like, listen, I'm really sad. I'm leaving. And I was like, well, this opportunity is one, too good to pass up. But two, this is what we wanted. Like, we wanted this for you because we wanted to see you be curious about a project or a process or an application. I gave, you took the initiative, you did the small things and they kind of built up. And as that happened, you've now created this opportunity for yourself and you are going to go on and be successful. And she's crushing it. So, be curious, be comfortable, and then put yourself out there, ask questions.
Great. Thanks, Dustin. So, for our viewers here, Dustin has spoken on 3 point. One is curiosity is important, looking out to solve problem statements, ask questions. Second is have a connectivity with the core finance functions, finance approach to solving problems, spreadsheets being one, having a data driven approach being another. And number three is be out there and say yes to things, ask questions as much as you can, and solve it end to end, and find the answers, right? So great, thanks for the answers, Dustin. And we come to the end of our podcast, and it was great having Dustin with you. Got to know a lot. Great discussion as always. Great insights and great journey that you shared with our viewers. So to all of you, thanks for being with us in this podcast. We'll be sharing the third episode soon. Till then, goodbye and have a good day. Bye.